I just clicked to go live at the same time that Chris is joining the call. So I I was. Let me see if I can get Chris added here. Sorry, it took us a little bit of time to get this set up. Good morning, Chris. Where do we find you? There we go.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
All right.
Welcome,
Great.
Chris. Welcome everybody who's up late or early.
I'm
Are you
coming in
driving
hot
through the
here.
snow? Yeah,
Uh,
you coming in through the snow?
well, it's not snowing anymore, but it did over the weekend. And I actually this morning I'm a little bit late because when I set my alarm, I forgot to account for the fact that Monday mornings is trash day, and so I had some work that I had to do before I left home. So I sent you a
Well,
message before. It's nice to live close because I sent you a message right before I left saying, "Hey, I'm gonna be a few minutes late," and I was almost right on time, but.
well, good. Well, thank you for joining, everybody. This is, I think, the fifth year that Chris and I have reviewed his end of season OM246 total organic material test results. And I think this is really interesting, and I'm excited to share it with you. And I know there's people joining this from all over the world who may have some questions or want to make some comments. So if you do, go ahead and put those in the chat, and we will either answer them instantly or sometime later on in the podcast. And so I think we've got questions that we will answer, Chris. A little bit of back and forth between me and you. We'll show some of the key charts, some of the key results from your most recent OM246 test results. Those samples, I think, were taken September 15th. And then we'll show the past 6 years of sand application rate and cultivation and stuff like that. And I've prepared a few slides to show what's normal for sand application rate, because that's, for me, the take-home message that I think is really interesting is you don't have to put as much sand as you might think you do. You don't have to punch as many holes as you might think you do in order to keep the organic material at the surface of a sand-based root zone relatively constant year after year after year. That's the take-home message. So I hope 40 minutes from now or 60 minutes from now or 90 minutes from now, whenever we finish this, that you will understand why that's the take-home message.
Yeah, we always, I think the last 3 years, we've said, well, these data are so stable that we should be able to have a pretty short chat, but then we end up talking about many things and other things, and it goes a little bit longer. But
Well, let's see your time, Chris. If it's 6:30 now, yeah,
yeah,
I think I kind of plan to wrap this up in an hour and a half. So I think we'll
yeah,
finish by 8 your time. Maybe we can even finish earlier if we don't have too many comments, because honestly, there's not so much that we have to say. Let me go ahead and bring up the seasonal OM2 chart. And what we're looking at now is a chart that's highlighted by season. If we look at the orange points and the orange line, those are the autumn results, and that's going from autumn of 2019 through to autumn of 2025. So we're looking at the 2019, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25 seasons. That's seven growing seasons. And I'll let you narrate this.
yeah. I mean, you can see a little bit, and I think I sent you a slide yesterday that shows kind of year by year what our processes and our sand look like, and you could see it's really incredible how stable it is. And then there are those 2 years where it's 5.2 and 5.4, and I think in both of those instances, those were years where we didn't aerify and the sand amount applied was less. But still, if you, I mean, Well, what is a couple percentage points on this, Micah? I mean, we've talked about that a little bit.
Well,
It's not.
you're
It's
not
not much.
talking. Yeah, we're not talking a couple percentage points. We're talking
I'm
a
sorry,
couple points,
tenths
a
of a
couple
percent.
tenths of a percent.
Yes.
So what we're looking at, it starts off at 4.7%. That's 47 grams of organic material per kilogram of soil in the top 2 centimeters of the root zone. So it starts with that in 2019 October, and right now in September this year it tested at 5.1. So it's fluctuated from 4.7 to a maximum of 5.4. So the total range has been less than a single percent, right? It hasn't gone from 4.7 to 5.7 on average.
Right.
It's stayed within within a range that varies by 0.7 percent. So to me, that's it's basically just constant. So it's a flat line, and it's always on average lower than the average for bentgrass greens. And so is that happening because you're putting a lot of sand? We're going to show that that's not the case. Is it happening because you're verticutting all the material out? No. Is it happening because you're applying a thatch decomposing product that's doing it? No. Is it happening because you're dusting every week and just constantly matching the accumulation rate with sand? No. But somehow you're getting enough sand down to keep the organic material relatively constant. But I think the main thing is the production rate of organic material is quite reasonable. So, I mean, this is just like simple, and I don't think that Hazeltine National Golf Club is the only place in the world that can have this kind of flat line and just kind of be right around average, or in your case, always a little bit below average, less organic material than is normal for creeping bentgrass greens.
Well, and if we think about the conventional wisdom, again, you mentioned it. The conventional wisdom is that this type of success or stability or comes from a lot of work, and that's just not the case. And as we've sort of joked between us, it's getting to be sort of a boring conversation because every year it comes back and it's relatively the same as it was the year before.
Right.
And
and we can refer back to things like 3 or 4 years ago when we share these kind of results and have a conversation with Dr. John Kaminsky from Penn State about this. And then he says, oh yeah, that might work for 1 year, but it won't, you can't keep it up. And then it's just like another 3 or 4 years have gone by and it's still just the same. So, and it's not just chasing this number. It's also having nice quality putting greens, like hosting the U.S. Amateur in 2024. Greens that have good firmness, greens that have a nice true roll, and greens that are at a championship level speed for much of the season. So that's the OM2. Should we look at the other depths and then look at the amount of sand that you've applied, Chris?
Yeah, that sounds great.
Okay. All right. So this is another chart that goes on the report. Let me make this as full screen as I can make it, and I'll take us off for a minute. So now we're looking at over time, the 0 to 2 centimeter depth, the 2 to 4 centimeter depth, and the 4 to 6 centimeter depth. And please be aware that the y-axis, the vertical axis scales are not the same. So the 0 to 2 centimeter depth, it goes from 0 up to more than 6%. And the 2 to 4 centimeter depth, please be aware that it goes from 0 to 3%. And the 4 to 6 centimeter depth, that scale goes from 0 to 2.5%. So the changes that you see, if these were all plotted on the same scale, the 2 to 4 and the 4 to 6 would be a lot flatter than they currently appear. But this is something where it's relatively flat at the 0 to 2 centimeter depth, always staying below average for bent grass greens. At the 2 to 4 centimeter depth, even though you're barely punching holes, that somehow manages to go down, which is interesting. And at the 4 to 6 centimeter depth, it's gone up from 1.4 to currently 2%.
Yeah, I mean, again, it's a little bit boring to look at, right? It's just kind of the same. We're kind of seeing the same trend happening each year, but that's the whole point of this is, you know, I don't mean to sum it up. You know, we're only 5 minutes in here, but
Well, this could be good. It's getting late here, Chris. So
yeah,
I'll be happy to go to bed.
We might be done before 7. But you know, the whole point is that it's as you said, it's great conditions, it's minimal work, and when I say minimal work, that's not just to do minimal work, but it's to have the work not disrupting the golf, and then it's checking those things to make sure, you know, things are staying where they're supposed to be, or that we're in the range that we want to be in, and that's happening. You know, and there might be some questions. Again, oftentimes it's thought that the goal is to have something that looks like the 2 to 4 series, which is a ever diminishing amount of organic material. But I would say, and we've talked about this a lot over the years, Micah, we're quite happy at about 5% OM in the 2 centimeters. We get a nice ball reaction, we have nice firmness, we have nice speed, we have, you know, just generally really nice conditions with those numbers. There's no desire for us to go lower. If we wanted to do that, I'm sure we could do it with some more sand and some more work, but I guess I asked the question of why would we? It's the performance of the surfaces is really good where they're at, so we'll just keep it there.
Yep, and it seems like you've got a good plan to do that based on repeating what you've been doing, which seems to be working. Mm-hmm. All right, we've got our first question, so let's go ahead and take a break and spice this up a little bit. This is from Jason Haynes. He asks, can you remind us what a typical year looks like for growth rates, sand amounts, aerifications, things that affect your soil organic matter levels? Chris, this would be, we'll talk about growth rates, but this would be a good time. We can just jump and show your slide now that shows what you've done. Does that make sense to answer that?
Yep.
All right. Good question, Jason. Chris just prepared this. And so now we're showing on the screen a slide that shows 2021 to 2026. Chris, it confused me a little bit when I saw the 2026 on there. And then I thought about it and I realized that what you're showing is that's the work and the sand that's been done after the 2025 samples were collected.
That's right.
Is that right? So,
yep.
So this is what's going to show up. This is going to have an effect on the 2026 samples.
Yep. So just to explain that to everyone, I consider the sort of, let's call it not a fiscal year, but an OM 246 year to be when the samples are pulled. That ends a year. So when we pull the fall samples, that ends one season and starts the next calendar. So when I pull the samples, that's to look at where we are for that particular year with that particular 12-month cycle of activity. And then what are we going to do in the fall? And because we have pushed essentially all of our sand top dressing to the fall months and after the closure of the golf course, then we'll get those samples, we'll get the results, and then we'll make a decision on how much sand are we going to put down. And then the results, knowing that sand is then going to impact the samples that come 1 year later. So that's how these numbers look. And
I look at that and it back in, let's see. So if we summarize this, Chris, there's one, two, in 6 years, there's been 3 times that holes got punched.
That's right.
Once with a dry eject,
Yep.
once with a solid tine and fill.
Yep.
I think in the 2025 cycle, maybe you had a venting, but no,
There
no
was
sand
there
added.
was one venting in there. That's correct. So in that
Yeah.
2025 cycle, actually, I might go back to the 2024 cycle still because it was right after the U.S. Amateur.
Oh,
So
you're
it
right.
actually would have been, yeah.
That would have been in the 2024 cycle. So that got a venting, but no
Yep.
sand added at
No
that
stand.
time.
That's right. I forgot to add that.
And then the 2026 cycle has a shallow microtine with some sand added. So, and partly some of this. Nice comment, Stephen. He says, proof is in the pudding. He wishes Dr. Kaminsky was on this. Well, Dr. Kaminsky might be. I think he's down in Melbourne, Australia now, so it should be about closing time down there. So maybe he could join us.
Well, as
Yeah.
Steve would, we get plenty of time to sit with Dr. Kaminsky in April and break this all down. And
Yeah, but we can tell him we were talking about him on this, and then he'll binge listen to it, and then he'll come in with some really good comments of how he agreed with this, but he wants to clarify a couple points and stuff, so that's quite good. The one thing I would say, Chris, with certainly the solid tine and fill, that was done kind of in advance of the U.S. Amateur, realizing that during the U.S. Amateur year you wouldn't be able to do much.
Yep.
And also this year the late September micro tine, that's also in advance of a professional event that's coming up next year.
Yep.
So this is having these data can be so useful to allow you also to plan into the future, to look 18 months or 18 months or even 2 years ahead or 1 year ahead, and make sure that you're putting the greens on a trajectory to where you'll be able to have conditions that you're really comfortable with going into the tournament weeks.
Yeah, it's. I mean, you're right. I mean, it's we have done something ahead of these tournaments, and it's not specifically to prepare for those tournaments, but I suppose there is a little bit of a, hey, let's do this because, I don't know, a CYA type of an element to it. I'm very comfortable with what we're doing. We've done it for long enough that it's not an accident anymore. But you don't want to have a tournament and have conditions that are substandard and then have anybody point the finger and say, oh, wait a minute, you're doing something that's very counter to the conventional wisdom here, and have that become part of a criticism. It shouldn't be, but we all know that sort of thing can happen.
So Jason also asked about growth rates. Mm-hmm. You've shown your nitrogen rates there that vary from a minimum of these are in pounds per 1,000 square feet. So we've got a minimum here of 0.75 pounds per 1,000 square feet per year, a maximum of 1.9 pounds per 1,000 per year. So we are in a range in metric of something like minimum of 40 kilograms per hectare up to a maximum of 100 kilograms per hectare. And this is on creeping bentgrass greens on a sand root zone, and it's about how old is the root zone now?
20. It was installed in 2010, so This would have been the 15th year.
And the amount of clipping volume that gets produced, if we add it up over the course of the year on a per square meter basis, this has ranged from a minimum of about 850 milliliters per square meter, adding up all the clippings over the course of the year, up to about 1.8. So 1.8 liters per square meter. So those are the total clipping amounts that have been produced above ground. And then what we're doing with this OM246 measurement is really we're measuring what's happening below ground.
I think, can you go back to that slide just
Yes.
briefly? Sorry.
Yes, I can.
I think another item that needs to be pointed out, and longtime listeners here will know that this is the case. But if you're new to this, you can see that those numbers clearly, the nitrogen number. I don't have a target number in mind. I'm responding to the growth. I'm responding to the conditions. I'm responding in large part to what my eyes are seeing, just from a density. How do I like the density? How do I like, what's the surface look like, and how is it performing? And then tying that to how much the grass is growing. So the nitrogen really becomes a component of how much the grass is growing and what am I seeing. And that started in about 2003, which you can see the rate was lower in 2003. It was up a little bit in 23. And in 2024 it was up a little bit, and then this year it was down a little bit. And so that's just all response to the how the grass is growing and what I see. And I would say this year, the difference between 2024 and 2025 could simply be that we had a cold spring this year, and the grass just we weren't getting a lot of growth. And I, early in my career, I would make the mistake of trying to coax that growth with nitrogen early in the spring. And I've come to understand and to realize in this climate coming out of winter, the grass just grows the way it wants to grow. And until the weather warms up, you're just not going to be able to coax the growth with nitrogen. So that very well could just be the difference, 2024 to 2025. A colder spring and a later start to regular applications.
Chris, I want to show now the 0 to 6 centimeter depth, which is even more boring. Okay, but I promise, folks, we're getting all kinds of excellent comments and questions. So we're going to start just jumping into that and move away from our prepared, deliberately boring remarks. But
look at that great background on this slide, Micah. That's
yeah. I spent minutes preparing the studio here for this call. So we have a background image of some lovely U.S. amateur tees from the summer of 2024. So what we're looking at on the screen now is 0 to 6 centimeter depth combined. So we can take the 0 to 2 centimeter depth, 2 to 4 centimeter depth, and 4 to 6 centimeter depth organic material values, make an adjustment for extra accuracy for what the probable bulk density is of each of those layers, because they have different organic material content and different sand content in those layers. And we come up with a organic material value of all of those layers combined, the 0 to 6 centimeter depth. That's not very deep. That's just going down it's from 0 to 2.4 inches below the root zone. And that right now is at 3%. And since the autumn of 2020, it's gone like this: 2.9, 2.9, 3, 2.9, 2.9, a little bit of an aberration last autumn when it was up to 3.2, but this year it's back down to 3. So it's been 2.9 or 3% for the past 6 seasons or so, which is quite boring. But that tells me not just at the 0 to 2 centimeter depth, but even going down deeper, it's not that the organic material is is accumulating deeper. It's just staying constant. So I just want to point out that this seems, when we started this, we didn't know this was possible. So part of the reason why we like to share it is because now we know it's possible, and then we know that it's not just possible here. It should be possible at a lot of places.
Well, let's be honest too. We like to share it because Dr. Kaminsky told us a few years ago that it wasn't possible to continue this over the long term. So we're just, if nothing else, we're just going to do this podcast in perpetuity to show John, to just make an attempt to prove John wrong every year.
That puts a lot of pressure on us.
I'm comfortable given the numbers. I'm comfortable with that.
Why are you putting down an extra top dressing, Chris? We need to make sure the numbers are good for John.
So eventually, here's what's going to happen: is eventually, Micah, we're going to be accused of cooking the books.
Yeah, it could be, but I think what we can do also is I have other clients who have similar results, and I think eventually everybody in the world will start to realize, hey, the way that we've been taught to do this, the way that we learned to manage organic matter, maybe it's not the most efficient way to do it. And I have some other slides to show that show just how different the amount of sand you've added is. And we've already shown how consistent the organic material is staying. So I will show what's normal. I'll show what's still being recommended now, and then I'll show what your numbers are. But we have all kinds of questions. Why don't we jump into some of the questions now, Chris? And let's see. All right. So there's a bunch of questions showing up on the screen. I'm going to go back in the chat and try to do these in order. All right. Randy Longcare asks, how many times or years does it take one to be at that sustainable, boring state if he starts to apply all the techniques in his management? Which I think the meaning of that question is, you were already managing to a pretty precise level by the time we started this timeline in 2019. So the growth rate was already under control. You already had a good organic material to begin with. The greens were already pretty mature, so they weren't just like spiking in organic material like you'll typically see in new greens.
Yep.
But let's just say you're an average facility. I know my answer, but I'll let you speculate.
I would think. Well, I suppose it depends on what your situation is. So, if you were coming into a situation and you were trying to correct some type of problem, it might take you a few years to get one down to the level you want and then to stabilize. But I would guess, I mean, as you said, Mike, if you generally have, if you inherit something that's in a good place and in a stable place, and the greens are considered to be, let's say you're coming into a place where the greens are considered to be good, and the reason you're coming there isn't necessarily because of some sort of problem previous to your tenure, I would think you could get these results really quickly. It may take you a year or two worth of data. Like, I'll think about myself. If I were to go somewhere else and the greens were, let's say it's completely different grass. Let's say it's POA. And I get there, start collecting the same sort of data that I'm collecting now. I would think that we'd get to a good place within a year. You'd have a first year of sort of baseline numbers, and then that second year, and then you'd know from the baseline numbers, do I like these? Do I want to go lower? Do I want to go higher? I think it's a couple year process. I think you need a year to learn the course, to learn what the numbers mean and how they correlate to conditions and playing conditions. And then I think you'd you maybe in the second year now you're dialing in your applications and your ideas about how you want to achieve those conditions. And so maybe let's say 2 years to get to learn it, and by the third year you're starting to sort of stabilize. That'd be my guess. I think it's something.
That was what I was going to say too. I think
Mm-hmm.
2 years, and then by the third year it starts to get boring. But you figure things out with a couple years of testing.
Mm-hmm.
Because the thing about this testing is you figure out how things changed in response to how the grass grew and in response to the work that you did. Then you
Yep.
can change it the next year. That allows you to calibrate a little bit, and by the third year you should be able to predict how things are going to work at your site.
I would also imagine you could probably shave a year off of that in a couple different ways. Let's say you come into a facility and that facility already has these numbers. You're gonna save some time there. And let's say you move to a facility and you're already doing these things previous at another facility, you're gonna save some time there. So I think if you're not new to the numbers, if you're not new and then there's numbers available, or if you yourself, like, if I moved to a facility that didn't have any of this information, I would be ahead by maybe a year because I've done this before, so I know how numbers correlate to results. Whereas if somebody came in here and they had some familiarity with the numbers were available to them, I would say that they would be able to um, acclimate themselves quicker than if those numbers are if there's nothing, no information.
Dr. Daniel Hahn has a question. He says it's a weird question. Um, it's a long one, so it doesn't fit on the screen. Chris, can you see the comments on your screen off to the side somewhere? I'll read it.
I,
I'm going to read
yeah,
it
I
for everybody
can.
that's listening, and then Chris can maybe find it to read also. So Dr. Hahn says, a bit of a weird question, but do you see any way to maintain golf greens with very minimal or almost no top dressing applications? He sees two issues. One, greens build up over time and sprinklers become too low over time. Dams build up like collar dams and direct water off, directing the water the way the greens were originally designed with surface drainage. That can get lost. Collars collapse if you don't top dress the collars. So you just one thing he's concerned about with top dressing is leveling stuff, and then also some courses don't have sand quarries nearby, and transport is becoming really expensive. So it's just simply struggling with the budget for sand. So he's giving a justification in the very long question that he's asking. He's saying a couple of the reasons why he thinks it makes sense to maybe consider managing without top dressing altogether. And so the question in short is, do you see any way to maintain golf greens with very minimal or almost no top dressing?
Well, a couple things. So we're going to talk, I think, a little bit here at some point about our new short course and where we're at with those greens. And so that might be something we can find out, and something we're going to find out. I would also say that I can see when I pull a core from our greens, I can see where basically I could see where we were when I started and how much we've added over my time here, and it's more than an inch but less than two, so maybe an inch and a half or so, and that's not adding a lot of sand over. I've been here 13 seasons. I would certainly think over 13 seasons it would be, depending upon your location, the type of grass, and how much you're applying, it would be easy for a green to have built up by 6 inches or more in 13 seasons. So I think to Daniel's point, I do think there's you do lose something over the years. Now that's imperceptible and nobody's ever going to notice it because it's happening so slowly. But I think if you're talking about maintaining the integrity of what's constructed from a slope and the way the collars and the outsides of the greens interact with the putting surface, absolutely. I mean, the less sand you're going to apply, I think the better you're going to be in that case, for sure. Do we want to just roll right into he asked another question, Micah, maybe just roll right into that.
Right. So we'll jump ahead to Daniel's follow-up question, which is when greens are built to a USGA standard, which means a certain drainage system, a certain depth of root zone, and a certain sand particle size distribution in that root zone mix. Top dressing over the surface is usually with a finer material, and then filling aeration holes with a coarser sand. And does HK mean head keeper?
I think HK is, yeah.
So meaning like the greenkeepers or the course superintendents are doing that. And so the question is, why not use the same sand that was used for the original root zone mix? I think
that is what we're doing.
Yeah, but you're also not doing it in season. So the reason why you struggle in season is you get material that at current modern mowing heights, the coarse material and very coarse sand and coarse sand, it does kind of stand out on a putting green that's mown at 2.8 or 2.6 millimeters and has a really dense surface. And so but see, here's what I want to say. I want to say that the reason why people are top dressing with a finer sand is they feel that they need to put that sand down. They need to somehow get sand down. And I want to show what Chris's amount of sand works out to be compared to what the minimum recommendation is. So basically the minimum recommendation in the US, like the lowest amount that you're supposed to apply, on average over the past 6 seasons, the amount Chris has put down is 45% of that. So already he's taken what the minimum amount of sand is supposed to be, and somehow by keeping the organic matter constant, he's been able to do that with 45% of what the minimum amount of sand is supposed to be. And this is jumping ahead to the end of a few slides that I prepared to show exactly what these numbers are. But the middle range of the standard recommendation right now in the US, not the minimum amount that you're supposed to apply, but the standard amount that you're supposed to apply to keep organic matter under control, the amount that Chris has applied on average is 30% of that. And so the question that you're asking, Daniel, is why not use the same sand that was used for the original root zone mix? I think a lot of these problems are self-imposed because we think we have to put this sand down, and I'm suggesting that we don't even have to put the sand down that much. So the problem goes away, not so much that we can just change the sand we're using and get away from a fine sand and a coarse sand and just use the original root zone material. But I think we can just put less sand in general, and that makes it so much simpler. Do you want to add anything to that, or should we jump to nitrogen rate?
No, I mean, I think that's a good point. And one of the advantages we found by top dressing only at the end of the season when we've done mowing and golf is done being played is that we can and do use the same sand spec that was used in the root zone for both top dressing and when we do aerify and fill the holes. That's the sand we're using. And we if you look at a plug of top 2 centimeters, you can see that there are some. It's not just a fine sand at the top. There's no doubt about that.
Stu Bradshaw asks, are your nitrogen levels based on growth potential calculations?
Yes.
Sort of.
Okay.
Right? Because don't you also base it on how much clippings you're getting?
Well, yeah. Okay. So, I don't think we prepared any slides for this, but
No, we're
the
not. We did not.
with the growth, the clipping volume and the growth potential are both informing the GVX, the growth versus expected, that ratio that we use to determine nitrogen amounts. So how much would the grass be growing, or is the grass capable of growing? How much is it actually growing? And then from that we get a ratio, which then informs the amount of nitrogen. And as I mentioned earlier, not necessarily in this context, I do, I am paying attention with my eyes to what I'm seeing, and I will move that rate up and down a little bit. I won't just simply go off of what the calculation is giving me. So I would say yes, it is based off the growth potential calculations, but also it's being informed by how much is the grass growing.
I'm going to look something up, Chris. Let me look up from your soil nutrient report, and where I look at the temperatures at your site, and I predict just straight up on growth potential. I'm not going to bring this up on the screen, but I'm going to look it up and find that number. So if we look for that side, if we just use growth potential and use the amount of expected mineralization at that site in Chaska, the predicted nitrogen use would be 1.74 pounds. And so that's going to be about about 80 kilograms per hectare. 80 or 85 kilograms per hectare, I think. So that's what's predicted. And if you look at what Chris has applied, it's a little bit lower than that. So when you base it on how much you want the grass to grow, and Chris doesn't want the grass to grow very much, so he's able to apply a little bit less than what growth potential would predict. All right, Eric Johnson joining us very early, but Eric does go to the office early. He asks, in the rare case you aerate, is the cultivation depth targeting the 0 to 2 centimeter layer or deeper?
Generally that layer. It's probably a little bit deeper, just because it's hard to get. So maybe it's probably not 4, but it's maybe 3, and then you'll have some tine wear. Tine wear that will keep that layer. We're affecting that. We're trying to affect the 0 to 2. I'm trying to think of how to say it. When we did the microtine this fall, we really only pulled out from about that 0 to 2. So generally that's what we're trying to do, even if maybe we're getting a little bit deeper than that.
Let's see. Lots of nice comments here. Glenn in the UK is saying recyclable composite sand. He's saying, isn't that being trialed? It looks promising. Glenn, do you mean the stuff that's made out of recycled bottles, like wine bottles or those sorts of things that they make into a sand? I've seen in Japan they make it out of sake bottles. I think one of the problems with that is it still going to work out to be pretty expensive when you have to look at moving that material, and you look at the amount of material that we typically use on a golf course? I think that stuff is still going to be expensive, but I don't know any details. If anybody knows some details about that kind of stuff, let us know. Uh-oh. John Petrovsky's coming. John, I'm going to show some stuff from of what the USGA is recommending. So, or has recommended in the past. So this will be good. John's got a nice long question for us, or comment, which also doesn't show completely on the screen. So I'll read it. Kind of building on Dr. Hahn's question. If you stopped top dressing and all cultivation on your A4 bentgrass greens, how long do you think it would be before organic matter levels became unmanageable from an agronomic and golfing point of view? Idea being just do the bare minimum or nothing and plan on a renovation when needed.
Well, I have a couple thoughts on this. While you collect yours, Mike, I'm ready for a little bit because I read ahead and I saw John's comments. So I do want to say that one of the things when I got this job, knowing that the greens were new A4, I did some research with those who had managed it. And one of the common themes that I heard and found from people who are managing A4 is, oh my gosh, you're going to have to beat the hell out of it. You're going to have to be so aggressive with that grass. It's so dense and it grows so much organic matter that you're just going to have to be on top of it all the time, verticutting, coring, brushing, all of these things. And, so I had that in my mind coming in and did some of that for sure, but really had never been overly aggressive on these greens. And certainly now I would think what we're doing would be called super non-aggressive. And it's just, it's not true. They don't need that. And I would suggest that any grass, no matter the density, can be managed non-aggressively as long as the growth rate is being managed appropriately. I would doubt that you could probably go without any top dressing. I think that's probably not going to be ideal for a lot of reasons, but I think, there is, as we've shown, there is a dramatic reduction that can take place that, becomes beneficial in many ways.
Yeah, I think, John, I would answer it by saying, yeah, you can't. If you stop top dressing and all cultivation on modern grasses, maybe the only solution would be, okay, we increase our verticutting and we just verticut all the time. Maybe then we could make it last forever. But I would say if you don't increase your verticutting and brushing and otherwise just removing material, it would last about 2 years and then it would not be at an acceptable standard. But what I want to say is we can basically continue using all the tools that we currently do, but I think we can do it at about 25% of the intensity that is standard. Mm-hmm. And because with measuring clipping volume, with the current nitrogen rates or the use of plant growth rate regulators or both, and with measuring what's happening in the soil with total organic material testing, which I call OM246, or you can call it the USGA standard method for measuring organic matter, or you can call it, in the UK, you can call it organic matter testing. It's a distinct method where we burn all the material in the root zone and estimate the thatch and estimate the living organic material.
On this subject, I just had somebody ask me in a side chat, could this be characterized as passive turf management or passive surface management? I've never thought of it that way, but it's not a bad way to characterize it.
Yeah. I mean, That's one way to describe it. I think I would look at it as reactive versus proactive. Okay,
Yeah.
and we're often taught that the best way to manage is to be proactive and solve the problems before they happen. Make sure that the work we do this year sets up the root zone to be the way that it needs to be next year. And so proactive has a very good connotation in the golf course maintenance industry, and I think in any kind of turf grass maintenance industry. And reactive has the connotation of being like you're not doing the work at the right time. You're behind the curve. You're not doing the work the way that you should be. But actually, because we're dealing with nature, because we're dealing with microbes that are breaking down organic material, because we're dealing with a drought this year, a heavier than expected, a heavier than usual rainfall the next month or the next year, we're dealing with a cold spring, we're dealing with a warm autumn, we're dealing with with trees that grow taller and add more shade. We're dealing with a living and a variable system. And I think it makes a lot of sense to measure some important things and then react to those. React to the playability of the surface, react to how much the grass is growing, react to the weather that happens that we can't predict, and react to the total organic material changes in the soil. And so I wouldn't call it passive because you're definitely taking actions. I like to think of it as we're reacting, and in the way that we're reacting, we are being proactive, and we can see that in the results that you're getting, where it's high quality surfaces, and as far as the organic matter goes, it's just a flat value. So yeah, maybe some people can think of it as passive. I kind of like to say, hey, it's reactive, but reactive in a good way, reactive in a way that has the same effect as being proactive, except if we're proactive but we can't predict the weather, we often end up doing too much.
Well, it's interesting. I'm just thinking about this as you're talking, and there's all these preconceived notions of how turf should be managed that come from years and years of managing turf. And it's not to say it's wrong. I'm not going to suggest that. It might sound that way, but like when I ask people about managing A4, the preconceived notions are that the A4 is needs to be aggressively managed, needs to be brushed, needs to be verticut, needs to be groomed in order to be a good surface. But that's not necessarily the case, and it's not. It's been proven to be the case. It's been proven that sort of things are not necessary in what we're doing. But how much do the preconceived notions about how we're managing turf or how we're supposed to manage turf, how much do they weigh into then how people do manage turf? And I'm not trying to say it's wrong, but it leads us down some roads that I think are maybe not 100% necessary. One more comment on John Petrowski's comment at the end. He said, do the bare minimum and plan on a renovation when needed. I would say that what we're showing over 7 years, and again, as Dr. John Kaminsky would point out, he doesn't believe this can last forever, but over the course of 7 years, I think what we're seeing is that, eventually you're going to want to renovate for all sorts of reasons, but I don't see this climb. We're not seeing this climb in organic material buildup that would lead us to, if I were just to pull the trigger on some kind of renovation at some organic matter level, I don't know what that would be, 8, 10, 12. When are we, it's going to take us a while to get there at this rate. So I guess the point I would make is if, and I've heard that comment, and I've had a discussion with a colleague who has that sort of was thinking that, just rebuild your greens, don't do anything to them for management for organic matter management, and just plan to rebuild them again in whatever time frame that is, 8, 10, 12, 15 years. But I would say that what we're doing is sort of showing that that's not going to be the case. After 8 years, that you can have them stable. In 10 years, they can be stable. In 12 years, they can continue to be stable and not just sort of deteriorating.
All right, everybody, we have a few more comments, and I'm sure there's going to be some more. And I would like to address those, but I think now would be a good chance for me to show what is normal for top dressing. And I'm going to quote from a few articles published in the past 2 decades. And I have a few slides that I want to show about that. And then I will end that by showing what Chris, the amount of sand that Chris has applied over the past 6 seasons, how that relates. And again, we've seen the data that shows that the organic material is relatively constant. So I want to talk about that for a few minutes so that we get through that, and then we'll just turn this into a peer discussion until we decide that it's time to end. So I'm going to bring this up. Chris, I'll leave us on the screen for right now, but if I need to, if we're blocking anything that's important, I will take us off the screen. There's just 6 slides here, and I hope everybody will appreciate this as much as I do, because these numbers are fascinating. And there's an article from the Green Section Record. It was published in 2003, I believe, by Pat O'Brien and Chris Hartwigger. The title is Aeration and Top Dressing for the 21st Century. I can't tell you how many times I referred to this article and taught from this article about how much sand should be applied, because this is something from 2003 onwards. I think that's when that was published.
Yeah, I can see 2003.
Yeah, so I was going to Cornell then, and of course I was studying about nutrients. I didn't know the exact amounts of aeration and top dressing that should be done. And then this is based on Dr. Bob Caro's work and on what people were getting good success with in the American Southeast. And, if you grow bent grass in the Southeast, that's really challenging environment. So I'm like, yeah, that's got to be the best way. If you can grow bent grass in the Southeast with this amount of sand and coring, this much aeration and top dressing, this should be like the standard. And so I was teaching that all the way up until 2014. So I started the Asian Turfgrass Center in 2006, and I did a lot of teaching and seminars and consulting and advising. I was recommending to apply that much sand. Well, in an article that was published then, I think in 2016 or so, this one's by Adam Miller and Todd Lowe. This is also in the Green Section Record about managing organic matter in putting greens. They refer back to that article from 2003, and they say that this is a direct quote from that 2016 article, and they say, to keep organic matter content below 3 to 4% in the upper root zone. I'll interject here and break my quotation and say that this is a slightly different method of organic matter that they're talking about, a slightly different method of testing, but that was the level of 3 to 4% that they were looking for back in the early 2000s using a slightly different method of testing. To keep organic matter content below that level, back to the quote, these articles recommend core aeration treatments that impact 15 to 20% of the putting surface each year, and top dressing programs that incorporate at least 40 to 50 cubic feet of sand per 1,000 square feet annually. End quote. And that's 12 to 15 millimeters of sand per year, or 190 to 240 tons per hectare per year. So this is what was recommended from 2003. I recommended it myself up until 2014. And as recently as 2016, if we read that full article by Miller and Lowe, they basically agree with that and say that is kind of what's recommended. But it's changed a little bit because in 2014, there was research published by Chaz Schmidt and Roch Gassois, and I think maybe Sarah Gassois, S.A. Gassois. So 3 authors on that. And they did a survey of many locations in the United States. And based on their analysis, they concluded this, and I quote, increasing sand top dressing frequency to every 7 to 14 days and applying at least 20.3 cubic feet per 1,000 square feet top dressing sand annually, combined with routine soil cultivation to ensure sand incorporation, are practices that can be utilized to manage soil organic matter. End quote. That is 6 millimeters of sand per year, or 100 tons per hectare. That was published in 2014. So people started looking at that as like, okay, this is like maybe a potential minimum amount of sand that we need to put at least this amount of sand. And that was at least 20.3 feet. So at least 6 millimeters or 100 tons. Then in 2019, in the Green Section Record, an article by Brian Whitlark and Cole Thompson, they made what I consider to be now the current standard recommendation. And they wrote in this article, which was about, I think the title of this is, I didn't put the title. I think it's called Light and Frequent Sand Top Dressing Programs or something. So to quote from that article, trends observed by USGA agronomists suggest that 25 to 35 cubic feet of sand per 1,000 square feet per year is a good annual target to adequately dilute organic matter. That's 8 to 11 millimeters of sand per year. I've rounded up. I rounded to whole millimeters. So actually that's like 7.7 to 10.6 millimeters. So that's it rounds to whole numbers to be 8 to 11 millimeters of sand per year. 120 to 170 tons per hectare per year. And I've heard this recommendation repeated up to the present time. This is from an article published in 2019. So I consider these to be the standard recommendations. I think as an industry, we're kind of moving away from that, let's say, what was it, 190 to 240 tons per hectare, or the 12 to 15 millimeters per year. We're moving away from that and getting closer to this. And I think in this article by Whitlark and Thompson, they also refer to the Chaz Schmidt paper, and they say that you want to apply at minimum, like you want to apply the minimum would be at least that 6 millimeters of sand that Chaz recommends, like at least that, and then you look for opportunities to add more to bring it up to this 8 to 11 millimeters that they're recommending. So that is my statement on what is considered standard. Now, I took the information that Chris provided in the slide that we showed earlier, where he had his season by season amounts, and I calculated the median values from the 2021 to 2026 OM246 testing cycles. He's been applying 2.8 millimeters per year, which is 43.5 tons per hectare, and 9.1 cubic feet per 1,000 square feet. So compared to that minimum value that was suggested by Chaz in 2014, this is 45% of that amount of sand. And compared to the middle of the range suggested by Whitlark and Thompson, this is 30% of that amount of sand. So I think that's why I started this off and said, at the very start of this, I said, the take-home message for me the take home message for me is that you actually can have consistent organic material at the top of a root zone with 30 to 45% of the amount of sand that's considered standard. And I just want, I want to shout that from the rooftops. I want to shout it through all my podcasts. I want to shout it in all the seminars and let people know that this is possible, because I see so many people doing so much work with a goal of managing organic matter, and whether a more passive approach or whether a more reactive approach could provide the same or better results. I think maybe it could. And so that's, I think that's kind of what I wanted to say. So, and I think if you look at those numbers, it's shocking, because people will just accept that these numbers are standard, that this is what you should be doing. But Chris is not the only person that's putting relatively small amount of sand as top dressing and seeing, and not cultivating, not punching holes so much. And he's seeing relatively constant organic material. And I know places like Andrew McDaniel at Kea Golf Club puts less sand and punches less holes, and his organic material is also relatively constant. But I don't use that as an example because it seems like a little bit too exotic. We have an even longer timeline for Kea Golf Club, actually. But again, because it's on Zoysia greens and because it's in Japan instead of in the United States, I don't use that as an example so much because people raise more questions about it. But to me, that's also quite persuasive. And I have some other timelines also where people are putting they're not putting 200 tons per hectare. They're not putting 11 or 12 millimeters of sand per year. They're just putting 2, 3, 4 millimeters of sand, and it's staying relatively constant. So I think once you get things the way that you want them, there are huge opportunities there. Okay, Chris, that's enough of me ranting. Should we just start answering questions until
we can do some more questions?
Yeah. I'd like to wrap this up in about 15 minutes if we can. So,
okay.
Anybody that's got questions or comments, send them. We'll answer as many as we can. And if you all really have a lot more questions that we can't answer, I will come back and try to answer them, and I'll try to coerce or convince Chris to do it also.
Micah, can you double cut in office hours?
Oh, so we would do a double cut and just, that would be very meta, wouldn't it? Could we office hours a double cut? All right. I'm going to scroll back because I can see, I'm showing on the screen the most recent comments, but I can shoot back. Let's see. Randy wanted, can we see Chris's nitrogen mineralization estimates per month? Randy, I'll show that another time. I'm not going to bring that up, but he gets a little bit of, I'm not going to show it on the screen because it's too complicated, but I'm predicting, because he has cold soil temperatures there because he's in Minnesota, and he only has 1.3% soil organic matter. So his nitrogen mineralization estimate is 0.3 pounds per 1,000 square feet, which is, man, I'm really struggling with the pounds to metric conversions today, more than usual. So 0.3 is going to be maybe 15 kilograms per hectare. So it's a negligible amount. It's not a lot.
I do put nitrogen in the tank every time, even if it's a very minuscule amount. So just on his last part, there is, I don't go, I used to, but I don't anymore make any application that doesn't have some amount of nitrogen in it.
Daniel asks about spatial variance. Do you manage all the greens the same way? And how many greens do you monitor? You can talk a little bit maybe about playability, clipping volume, and organic matter sampling. So how many greens are actually measured for various things?
Speed is we're getting green speed on a wide variety of the greens. We have, say, maybe 5 greens or so that get measured every day, and then there's a wide variety that are getting measured on maybe a slightly lesser amount, but that's, let's say the green speed comes from somewhere between 9 and 18 greens per day. The clipping volume is every green every time we mow, always. And I would say, we talk about spatial variance. The way that I think about it is sort of, we apply, some of our greens are small with a heavy traffic pattern, and some are big with a light traffic pattern. That's just a general way to describe it. And those, when I test the OM, I test different versions of each of those greens. So I test small greens with heavy traffic and big greens with light traffic. And we're trying to keep those generally close. And so the amount of nitrogen that would go in a tank that is going to be regular, that's going to be applied all the time, is the amount of nitrogen that's going to properly supply those big greens with light traffic. Then we come back to the small greens with heavy traffic, and on some kind of intermittent basis throughout the summer, oftentimes with a eye test or looking at ball marks and how they're healing, then we're applying a supplemental amount of nitrogen to those greens. So when I say that our nitrogen rate is 0.83, that's just on every square inch of every putting surface across the golf course. That's the amount that they're getting at a minimum. And then there will be other areas that will get more depending upon what they need. A high traffic edge, an area, again, small greens with light traffic will get more nitrogen. We have our small putting green right up by the clubhouse, which is actually each of those greens in one. The far half of it towards the golf course gets a small amount of activity, a small amount of traffic. Meanwhile, the half of it that is closest to the golf shop and the first tee gets the most amount of traffic of any green on anywhere on the golf course. So we're always trying to manage the differences, and I think we do it quite well. We see that in the green speeds, and we see it in the clipping volume from all of those greens. So that's how we deal with that. There's a little bit of an art to managing the spatial variance. That's how I would, yeah.
Chris, Stevens bringing in ultra dwarfs, and I didn't quite catch your any grass comment. Do you understand this?
I think when I was talking about the lack of disturbance or the lack of disruption, the lack of brushing, grooming, I said it would be this way in any grass. Here's what I would say about ultra dwarfs. I've said this before, and if I were to go to South Florida tomorrow, which would be an extreme extreme change, given that it's negative 17 degrees Celsius here this morning, which is 6 degrees Fahrenheit. That would be an extreme change. But if I were to go to South Florida tomorrow and start managing ultra dwarfs, which I have zero experience with, I would start with the principles that we've been talking about today and the principles that I've been using on these greens, knowing that those principles are going to have to be adjusted, like the knobs on an amplifier, to deal with a different grass in a different locale. But I would start. The principles would be the same. I would have the same ideas about how I wanted to manage the grass and grow the grass, and then I would adjust according to what I needed to do.
Eric mentions the Disturbance Theory series, which is a excellent series of articles that are also available as a small booklet that's probably out of print now. This was by Richard Windows, who's now with RNA, Henry Bachelet, who I think is now with with ICL perhaps, but they wrote these articles back in the 2000s, maybe the early 2010s, about disturbance theory, which is based on Professor Grimes. The late Professor Grimes says that there's plants that thrive in a competitive environment, in a stress-tolerating environment, or in a ruderal or a disturbed environment. And they recommended to favor specific grasses like fescue or bentgrass, disturb the surface in a way, or don't disturb the surface in a way that will favor your desired grasses. So Eric is mentioning disturbance theory and saying that's equivalent to minimalist passive management. And I think there's certainly something to that. Because I think, Chris, part of what you're doing is trying to grow bentgrass and not Poa annua.
Right.
So if you're putting more nitrogen, if you're doing more coring, if you're doing more disruption, those are the type of things that we would expect to favor Poa annua invasion.
Well, that makes me think when Eric says that going back to my time at Northland, when Dr. Kaminsky was setting up these Google Meets, and Micah, you would have been a part of that. That's when we first met up, and Eric was oftentimes a part of those. That was the disturbance theory was something that was often discussed in those meetups. And if I think about what I'm doing now, I think it's a progression on the interest that I had in the disturbance theory and the interest that I had from the practical greenkeeping, and those are sort of the basis of what I've been doing and how I think about managing grass, and it's just become more refined and more sophisticated over the years, is the way I would say it. The other thing, I just got back a couple weeks ago from my 7th trip out to Bandon Dunes, and Eric's old stomping grounds, and it's you can see the disturbance theory at play at Bandon in the fact that all of those greens now are basically Poa, because the resort is so busy and gets so much play that the ability to keep fescue on a putting surface is, I think, proven to be very difficult, which I think is a little bit unfortunate, but just the way that it goes. And there's nothing wrong with the Poa surfaces are awesome and they're great to putt on. If you think about that, if you had these, and Eric will probably hopefully nod along as I say this, if you had those greens and you seeded them to fescue and nobody ever played on them, or 5 people played a day or something like that, you'd have no trouble maintaining them as fescue. But as soon as you put all that traffic on them and you put people on them, 365 days out of the year, you're going to have a difficulty keeping the fescue as the surface, and the Poa is going to want to dominate, which is what they have gone to, and rightfully so, I believe. But it's an interesting way I've been going to Bandon regularly since 2009, and I've seen the change out there as it's become more popular and more busy and it's had more play. So
I'm going to jump ahead to Stephen Hicks, who has a question that's very timely about the new greens, because I think he's aware that you grew in the 9-hole or 10-hole short course. So Stephen says, how has this approach impacted the grow-in of the newer playing surfaces? Were any differences noted from other experiences growing in new surfaces from a traditional approach? So we do have some slides queued up that show what your organic matter has been on the new greens, but maybe you could just talk a little bit about like how you manage the new greens compared to the classic or the championship course.
I would, let's see, how do I want to, just as a broad comment, I would say that in growing the greens in, I obviously wanted to have I wanted to limit the amount of POA that came into those greens through the grow-in, which I would say we absolutely have done. There's I would say virtually no POA because I can't think of having seen any POA. I think a little bit in the native soil fairway areas, but on the greens with a clean root zone, a sand root zone, I can't say that I've seen a POA plant. Um, so I would say my goal was to get those greens grown in as fast as possible. And so, Micah, you and I worked a lot together on the nutrient levels on this, making sure we had the right amount of phosphorus, the right amount of potassium.
It
And
was
then,
borderline, right? Well,
yeah,
right at the
borderline,
limit.
right on the limit. That's right. But enough to make sure that nothing was, that it wasn't inhibiting the growing of those greens. And so the easiest way to say it is that we just tried to get 100% cover on those greens as fast as we could. And I sort of thought about it as a race. In the end, what it ended up being was a race to 5 pounds of nitrogen, 5 pounds per thousand square feet. And once we got to 5 pounds per thousand square feet, and that wasn't necessarily the target going in, that was just we got to 100% cover or close to it, and we were at 5 pounds. And I'm like, okay, we're going to stop here, and now we're going to move to an amount of nitrogen that's closer to what we're doing on the championship course. And
So
and I would say
from the time
go
of
ahead.
seeding until you applied 5 pounds, that's what it
Yep.
took to get. So,
Right, to
so
get to
I
where
just,
to finish the grow in, is the way I would look at it.
okay, so I'm just interrupting to say that's 250 kilograms per hectare of nitrogen. And now back to Chris's story.
Hold on, I had to do a little bit of my send a message here for my real job.
Oh, okay. So 250 kilograms per hectare. And I will say this is why I prefer grams per square meter, because we can always keep the numbers on a scale from 0 to 100. Because once you start applying a lot of nitrogen, you go up over 100. But it's recommended for units to, if you can, use units that will be on a scale that are whole numbers from 0 to 100. So if we do grams per square meter, which they do in Japan, and that's where I really have done a lot of studying of the metric system. I like grams per square meter because we can say 25 grams per square meter instead of 250 kilograms per hectare. I think that's a little bit simpler, a little bit more elegant. Back over to you, Chris.
Yeah. So once we got to 100% cover, then we basically went to sort of a regular approach, nitrogen approach, with very small amounts regularly every time we had the sprayers out in the greens. And that might be a little bit abnormal. I haven't done big growings like this, so I'm very much reacting in this instance to my eyes more so than what the volume was. We kept the clipping volume from once we started collecting clippings. We kept it every day. We have all the same data. We've done the OM246 for 2 years. Last year when they barely had grass on them, we did the OM246, and this year with full grass on them, we did the OM246. There's the results. And so what we were trying to do is just get to where we needed to be as fast as possible, and then back off and have those greens be managed in much the same way as the championship course greens.
And, Chris, I was really surprised when we did this testing. So I'm showing the chart now with the short course total organic material. The OM2 last October, on October 15th of 2024. So at that point, you weren't up to 250 kilograms of nitrogen at that point, were you? You weren't up to 5
No,
pounds?
we didn't get to that mark until early in the spring, sort of, May, maybe early June.
Yeah. So at that point, they were 1.8%, which is about as low as you're going to measure on creeping bent grass.
It was really hard to get the samples to hold together last year. We maybe had, when I did these samples last year, maybe we had 75% cover or something like that, or 80% cover. But as one of the ways I referred to it was, when you're growing in, even at 80, 90% cover, you've got a collection of individual plants. And then by the time we took the samples this fall, now we had a turf, and I think everybody can understand what I'm saying there is, a collection of individual plants, which is all, very much there's an open canopy, even if it's covered mostly. But once you have a turf, then that turf is knitted together. Now you're actually, the ball is rolling across a matrix of plant parts as opposed to just having individual plants.
And then so I was surprised how you're up at 5.1% now, which is very similar to what you are on the championship course. Although we would expect on the new greens, maybe there's a bit more living material there that's also included in this measurement. But 5%, it was a little bit higher than I expected. I thought maybe it would be like 4 or something. How did you top dress this year, Chris, on the short course?
Hold on one. If you bear with me, if you can. Here we go. Okay. On the short course, we did. Do you have a? Can you write these down, Micah, as I spit them out?
Yeah.
We did on May 14th 1.3. On June 5th 1.7. On June 24 1.5. Then we went through the whole. That was the last of the top dressing on the short course. Then on November 5th, we did 0.8, and then we did 1.1 on November 11th. So does that add up to?
Well, up to the time you took the samples in September, the amount of sand that was added in May and June was 4.5.
Yep.
And I think, this just shows that when you put a lot of nitrogen and you have a growth rate that is stimulated by putting that much nitrogen.
Keep talking, Mike. I'll be right back.
Okay. When you put 5 pounds of nitrogen or 250 kilograms of nitrogen per hectare, then it requires a lot more sand in order to keep the organic material at a similar level to what you would have if you were applying less nitrogen. So I really think the accumulation rate is quite important. Let's see. I can answer some of these questions now. Let me go back to another screen. Let's see. Corey Almack makes the comment, aerify yourself out of a job. That's a good one, Corey. I think by that you mean if you aerify too much, the customers or the members could potentially be in a situation where they don't appreciate all those holes in the greens. I think that could be the case. I think this type of testing is really useful also to justify. It's not all about doing less. If your organic matter is going like this, if you over time are seeing the organic matter going like this and the surfaces are not performing with water infiltration or with firmness or with softness of the surface, if they're not performing and your organic matter is going like this, that is justification to say we need to put more sand, we need to punch some holes, we need to be, again, I would call it reactive. We're reacting to the results, but you could say it's proactive. We need to be proactive in this case and keep to stop that increase in organic matter. So I think these type of measurements can help justify the work that needs to be done, and they can also be used to demonstrate the effectiveness of the work. Ryan Stonecker asks, at what depth are you targeting microtine and venting? Venting, you were down to probably 3 inches or so.
Yeah, maybe something like that. Maybe maybe 3 inches. I mentioned this earlier. I mean, we're trying to impact the 0 to 2 centimeters, but knowing that we're going to go a little deeper than that, but we're not concentrating on anything. We're not trying to get depth when we do those things.
And this is a nice comment from Golf Super T90. The last 5 years, I've been applying 25 tons over 4 acres each November. 25 tons total over. Yeah, I get confused. I want to recommend on the ATC website, you can get. I would need to use this too to figure out what that rate is. At the ATC website, you can go and find just search for the OM246 calculator, and it's got a sand conversion rate tab, so you can convert between millimeters and tons and so on. So tons per acre is not a unit that I'm able to convert in my head. But seeing the organic matter go from 5.77 to 4.91 shows that that's effective, and that's certainly way, way, way less sand than is typically recommended. Glenn made a comment that they apply 30 tons per hectare. Fescue is slow growing in the top. So your annual sand amount is 30 tons per hectare. That's what I'm understanding that to be, which is also considerably less than what the standard recommendations are in the USA. Good. We got one wetting agent question, Chris, and then we're gonna we'll be able to ease out of this. Glenn asks, I would like to ask if Chris is still using a wetting agent across the greens course akin to your blog post. He said cheap wetting agent. I don't know if it was cheap or expensive.
What he's referencing is just using any wetting agent at a low rate every time we spray. And yes, that we're still using that same approach. It's worked really well for us. So,
but you could use a cheap one or an expensive one, I suppose.
Yep, that's right. Yeah.
So I think that's
the belief.
That was one of your Substack. Your Substack was just saying do something like apply it frequently. All right. Well, everybody, thank you so much. This is awesome because we started off and it really is boring when the results just stay the same. And yet it's also seems like essential testing. It seems essential to know. The reason why it's essential to know is because you're doing basically 30 to 45% of what is considered like the bare minimum. So if you're taking the bare minimum in terms of sand and then cutting that in half, if you don't check to make sure that things are still fine, then doubts would start to creep into your mind and you start saying, you know what, we're going to go out and get closer to what's being recommended. I think the textbooks are wrong. I think the standard recommendations are too high. And, for anybody who wants to know what I recommend, you can find it on the ATC website. You can find it on Pace Turf. You can find it on all my podcasts, my YouTube channel. Come to my seminars at the upcoming GCSAA conference and hear all about it, what I call the Woods Performance System, for 4 hours, 2 separate seminars where I describe how this works and how you can find out to do the exact amount that's right for your facility, not just copying what Chris has found is the right amount for his facility and his climate and the snow outside and the 6 degrees Fahrenheit conditions that he's in right now. But this is a system that can be applied anywhere in the world to optimize conditions at your facility. So thanks, Chris, for joining me. Thanks for being such a good sport about coming in so early and doing this when you actually do have a real job.
I also have a GCSAA seminar too. You've
got a Substack. Say all the things.
Okay, so I have a Twitter/X is now done. It's gone. I haven't used it for years, and finally, after sort of holding on to the account for some amount of time, the CT_turf account on X is no more. So if you go looking for it, you won't find it. Um, I will say the Substack that I started and contributed to a lot has been a little bit dormant over the last year, 2 years. U.S. Amateur and building a short course and growing in a short course, and just as I mentioned earlier, doing my real job. That writing is a hobby for me, and when I have time, I do it, and when I don't, I sort of just let it lie as is. But I'm sure at some point that will return, and I'll start doing more of that. And then also I'll be doing a 4-hour seminar at GCSAA conference and trade show with Doug Soldat. We have done that. We've done this together for maybe 4 to 5 years. COVID was in the middle of that, so it messes me up just a little bit. But I think this will be the 4th or 5th time that Doug and I have done that seminar together. It's proven to be very popular. It talks a lot about what we've discussed today, with Doug adding information from his research that he's doing at Wisconsin. This year we're adding, in response to much the same as you did, Micah. We some of the responses that we got on our surveys were that people would like to hear a little bit more about warm season grasses. So we've added Chris Hartwager to our lineup this year for a little bit of information about warm season organic matter management, top dressing, and so that will be, I think, a good 4-hour seminar. If you've taken it before, I think we try to update it all the time, so it's a good one to come back and take again after a few years. And if you've not taken it in the past, I think you'd thoroughly enjoy it, especially if you enjoyed this discussion.
Great. Well, we will, maybe we'll do a double cut on this topic sometime. Do a double cut on office hours. But for now, I think we'll just end it. And if y'all want more, send some emails or something and ask for us to explain things. And if we somehow haven't been clear enough here, and you do have questions about what we were trying to convey here, or what these results are showing, or how this might apply to the work that you do, go ahead and let us know in the comments or send emails. And I do try to respond to emails. I have a long queue of unresponded emails, but there's definitely a queue, so I work on it. So thanks everyone. For the Americans, hope you all had a great Thanksgiving, and for everybody around the world, hope the last month of the year is a good one, and that we'll all have a great holiday season and a new year coming up for 2026. All right. Thank you, Chris, for joining. Thanks everyone who joined us live. Thanks everyone who's listening to the recording of this. I'm going to go ahead and shut it down now. For ATC from Nakhon Si Thammarat, Thailand, I'm Michael.